So this next miracle has to be one of the most famous of all of Elisha. We go to the kingdom of Syria, and the captain of the Syrian guard, one of the leaders of the army, his name is Naaman. We would traditionally in English, we pronounce his name Naaman.
And it means pleasant, like it's pleasant to look upon. And yet he has a skin disease that creates the opposite. He's got leprosy. We're not exactly sure what it means, but he would have been physically and visually unpleasant to look upon. And so there's this contrast going on with his name, that even though he is called pleasant, he's dealing with this very unpleasant reality that only God can save. Now, there's a lesson here for all of us. We're all pleasant people in the sense that we're all children of God, and yet we have fallen nature. We all have some form of spiritual leprosy that impacts our pleasantness, and God can heal us, particularly if we listen to the prophets, even if they ask us to do things that don't seem particularly spectacular.
Or that we didn't expect at all. So Naaman happens to have a handmaid who has been taken out of the kingdom of Israel as a captive from a previous battle, who is a handmaid for his wife. She sees the struggle that Naaman's going through, and she says to to Naaman's wife, "Would to God that Naaman were down in Israel, because there's a man there, a prophet, who could heal him of his leprosy." Speaking of Elisha. So the king of Syria sends a letter to the king of Israel and says, I'll give you all of this as a reward if you'll heal my servant here, this captain of the guard, Naaman, of his leprosy. King of Israel gets pretty upset about that, by the way. And Elisha knows what's going on, so he comes and he says, send him to me. I'll take care of him. So you can picture this big parade of important people from Syria, laden with all of these gifts to be granted in exchange for the healing.
And from a political standpoint, the king of Israel is not super happy about essentially having a general come into his land for medical treatment. Because, what's going to happen when the general is there with his, half his army? Is this an invasion? Is this an invasion under the pretext of medical help? And it's interesting how Naaman responds to what happens with Elisha. Just the political intrigue is just an interesting perspective here.
Beautiful. Now, listen to this. Verse 9, so Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. And you can picture the drum roll, the anticipation of this big healing event, this call down of power from heaven to heal the leprosy. Verse 10, and Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. So Gehazi comes out and says, yeah, go wash in Jordan. And it's this anticlimactic feeling for Naaman. He's saying, what are you talking about? And he actually gets angry. Verse 11, Naaman was wroth and went away. And he said, behold, I thought, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper. And can you picture him looking at the Jordan River flowing there? And by the way, the Jordan isn't a mighty river. It's not wide. It's not quick running. It's pretty muddy and dirty.
And coming down from Syria, the headwaters of the Jordan are actually just a little bit north of here. He may have already crossed the Jordan. He may have already got himself wet getting to this spot. So why would I go do that again? I've already gotten myself wet in the Jordan once getting here.
So he's sitting here looking at this dirty river. And his response in verse 12 is, are not Abana and Pharpar rivers of Damascus? Damascus is capital of Syria up here north. Are they not better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. He's saying, I am not going to humiliate myself by going down into this dirty river. He sees this as beyond a joke. This is a mockery to him, and he's angry. He's now going away. Thank heaven for some unnamed individuals in this story. Look at verse 13. And his servants came near and spake unto him, and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee to do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather then, when he saith to thee, Wash and be clean? The servants are saying, Look, what do you have to lose? You might go into this dirty Jordan River 7 times. At the end of the day, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if he had asked you to do some huge thing, you would have done it. This is a really simple thing that the prophet has asked you to do. Go try it.
I love this part of the story because many of us throughout our lives have some position of responsibility where we have to make decisions on behalf of others. Good leaders are willing to listen to the wise counsel of those with whom they serve. And I love their humility because they call him my father, which in the ancient Israelite world, somebody who was a generation older than you or in a station above you, you would categorize them as a father or a mother. And so they're being very deferential, recognizing that Naaman is in this position of power and authority. And I also love that Naaman comes to his senses. He humbles himself.
It's amazing to watch. Oh, and by the way, verse 14, it's so short. It's only, 5 or 6 lines? But there's so much contained in this one short verse. It says, Then went he down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh came again, like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. What we don't know, it doesn't tell us, is this a healing by degrees? Does he go down into the water the first time and come out and look at the leprosy and see that it's 1/7 less, and gets out of the water and then goes back in and now it's another 1/7 less? Or does he go into the water, dip himself 1 time and come out and looks no different, and goes in a 2nd time and comes back out and looks no different? We don't know. It doesn't tell us. But it would be fascinating to me if that 2nd option were the case. Because you can imagine that moment as he's standing on the shore after having dipped 6 times in the river, looking at the leprosy thinking, nothing happened, but I'm gonna trust the prophet. I'm gonna do it 1 more time. And you can picture that moment, if that's the scenario that played out, as he comes up out of the water that 7th time, and now that beautiful realization of there is a God in Israel who spoke through his prophet, and that which was dirty is now clean. And do you see the beautiful symbolism of being in Jordan? Dipped in Jordan, the symbolism of Jesus going to the Jordan River to be baptized. Not that he was dirty and needed to be cleaned or cleansed, but this beautiful symbolism of baptism, which is the death of the old creature and the rebirth and the newness of life of this spiritually reborn creature.
Yeah, being born again like a little child.
Exactly. So the symbolism here of Naaman's miracle plays out with you and me today. Every time we go to the sacrament table and we make that covenant with the Lord again through the ordinance of the sacrament, the only ordinance that we repeat for ourselves in life, it's the same thing. It's that capacity to be cleansed of our leprosy today. And leprosy looks different on me than it does on you, than it does on Taylor. But it's still leprosy. And it still makes us not pleasant, as he was talking about the name of Naaman, what it means. So the next miracle comes because Naaman comes back to Elisha to offer him this reward for having healed him. But I love the fact that Elisha is not in this for money or for gain. He's not performing the miracles for the Lord so that he can glut himself on the riches of the world. So he turns it down. And Naaman said, okay, and starts heading away, heading home. Well, Gehazi, the servant, runs after him and tells him, lies to him, and says, oh, two sons of the prophets just arrived, and we could use 2 changes of clothing and some silver to help them out. So Naaman gives him all kinds of stuff, and they go back, and he loads the goods, hides them away in the tower, it says. And then he comes into Elisha, and Elisha asks him where he's been. And Gehazi lied to him again. Thy servant went no whither. I didn't go anywhere. Why are you asking me? And then he tells him, yeah, I know what you did. And Naaman's leprosy is now going to be on you as a reward. So this particular miracle is one of being able to discern the truth from the lies, from the errors, and then extending that leprosy onto Gehazi. And you would think, wow, that's a tough punishment. Brothers and sisters, the leprosy, the skin deep condition that Gehazi just received is nothing compared to the heart deep problem that Gehazi manifested in verse 20 through 23. His lying, his deception, his lusting after the silver, that's way worse than the leprosy in his skin that he's going to get. And so it is with us. Sometimes the outward consequences are just outward shows of inward struggles that we really ought to be working on, humbling ourselves and turning to the Lord and asking Him to change our heart.